So here's a piece I wrote back in the beginning of 2020 about freedom of expression in Canada. This is the first time I've actually put it on video, and see what you think. Have we actually gotten worse in terms of freedom of expression, or have we gotten better? And I think everyone knows what the answer is, but I'm going to read the piece. It's the top 10 most dangerous threats to freedom of expression in Canada. Here we go. Freedom of expression took a real beating across the Western world in 2019. On university campuses, places meant to be the bastion of free speech, there's been a deep chill, from stifling security fees imposed by university administrations on free speech clubs that bring in controversial speakers, to mobs of students themselves shouting down anyone they disagree with, to the infiltration of student unions by those concerned more with emotional safety than ideas. The realm of academia has been hit hard. The rest of society has not been immune. In Canada, the federal and provincial governments have been toying with implementing legislation that would either fine or imprison people that were deemed to be saying hateful things. The wave of suppression on free speech has hit the Western world from Germany to America. Some of the most vitriolic debate, however, has occurred in Canada. But also, some of the most ardent supporters of freedom of expression, such as Jordan Peterson, have come out of this country. However, as lawyer John Carpay from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has said, things may get worse before they get better. If it's going to get worse in Canada, it will likely come from these top most dangerous individuals and institutions. And that's not something democracy has to look forward to in 2020. Number 1, Goldie Hyder. As President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, this is by far the most dangerous man in Canada right now, especially as someone with access to the levers of power that control what Canadians are meant to talk about. His pet project, an organization called Century Initiative, wants to flood Canada with more people, so we would achieve 100 million people by the year 2100. Only mass immigration could achieve this goal. His argument is that Canada is a sparsely populated country. It's a commonly naive argument. As any first-year university geography student knows, the utter fallacy of it is terrible. Space is not what matters for a large country. Arable land per person is what matters. And when discussing whether a country has an underpopulation or overpopulation problem, arable land per person, indirectly also a measure of food security, puts Canada at 1.22 people per square kilometer. That's a little more arable land per person than Argentina at 0.9 square kilometers. It is roughly in the same realm as Russia. As high-latitude countries with large areas of cold climate and extensive crops, it is just as it should be. In some ways, it could be argued that based on arable land and the nuances of our soils, climate, and crop types, we actually have a slight overpopulation problem in 2019. But adding 63 million more people on top of our current 37 million would be an unmitigated environmental disaster. Hyder will not hear of this. He would rather promote the narrative that Canada is selfish and has resources that should be raped and pillaged and then sold to the rest of the world without worry over moral issues like how they are used and what kind of destruction they create in Canada. He seems to think his overpopulated birth country of India is a good example to follow. Perhaps the most superficial analogy he used was on his LinkedIn account, where Canada's Judgment Day, as he called it, essentially lauded the idea of exploiting every last natural landscape there is, and suppressing those that disagree with such actions. Every environmental organization in Canada should be worried about this man and his organization. Every First Nation, already overwhelmed numerically, should be worried about becoming ridiculously insignificant when Indigenous populations would barely exist as a statistic. But what does this have to do with freedom of expression, you might ask? Well, when simpletons suggest Canada is underpopulated, they can be ignored. But most galling is Hyder's current influence. Hyder spoke with reporters in Ottawa in April of 2019, prior to the last election, admitting that, in quotes, "What I've said to the leaders of the political parties is, please, please do all you can to resist making this election about immigration." That was in public. We can only imagine, with his influence, what he's doing in private, behind closed doors, to stifle open debate and free speech, especially on the immigration file. Number 2, Ravi Kahlon, a British Columbia MLA for the Delta North riding, in the summer of 2019, traveled around the West Coast province to hear from people that felt they had been victims of hate crimes. As the provincial NDP's poster boy for multiculturalism and leftist puritanism, the current federal legislation around hate crimes has not satisfied Kahlon at all. He has taken it upon himself to investigate non-criminal means for punishing people from saying in public what they really think and feel. He would like to ticket people for saying apparently hateful things. Yet Canada already has well-crafted laws that define hate speech as anything that incites violence against a particular individual or group. In a vein of overzealousness, Kahlon wants to go further. The American political and legal philosopher Joel Feinberg became known for proposing the offense principle, which suggests any speech that offends, as opposed to causing actual harm, should be open to censorship. Well, Kahlon, in alignment with the Feinberg offense principle, would like to see offending speech be treated as a misdemeanor through ticketing. Any step in that direction, however, no matter how minor, is an act of incremental dangers. And as criminal defense lawyer Sarah Lehman noted in an article from 2019 in December called "Ticketing Hate Speech Creates a Slippery Slope," that came from The Straight, by the way. Now, trying to draw a line on what constitutes hate speech has always been a cauldron of murky soup that no one has ever been able to disentangle with clarity. For some reason, Kahlon seems to think he's different, and he could do a better job than anyone else at defining hate speech. And the punishment he would met out would definitely dissuade people from saying openly what they actually think and feel. If given more power, we can only imagine what Kahlon would do with it. Now, thank goodness for democracy's checks and balances, which happens to include people saying what they actually think and feel. But there is something much worse under the covers here. Kahlon is a personable fellow. He even seems well-intentioned. Unfortunately, he has a dangerous character flaw. His Twitter account is littered with likes and reposts from people making disparaging and degrading comments about those with skin color lighter than his own, aka whites. The remarks have deeply quasi-racist undertones. You know, I wrote that in 2000, right at the end of 2019. And it's not quasi-racist, it is racist. As John McWhorter calls him, actually it's more like neo-racist. Kahlon is very much a neo-racist. Anyway, I'll go on. At the very least, they have a discriminatory bias towards people with light skin color. The fact Kahlon does not recognize his actions as essentially hateful puts doubt on his credibility as someone capable of discerning what constitutes hate. He lacks the skills of discernment. This flawed character trait, bordering on racism itself, not actually say it is racism, makes Kahlon not just a danger to British Columbians, but a danger to all Canadians. Other jurisdictions across the country are looking at similar sectarian approaches for stifling people from saying what they think, and Kahlon has taken it upon himself to lead the egregious pack. With closet racist tendencies, Ravi Kahlon, in a great irony, is the one person least qualified to go down this road, and therefore the second greatest danger to freedom of expression in Canada, a true wolf in sheep's clothing, if ever there was one. Number 3. Remember, I wrote this like right at the end of 2019, like December, right at the end of December. Number 3. Here's a man, a party, a leader, looking at bringing back a ridiculously flawed piece of legislation, Section 13 of the Human Rights Act. As an overly broad piece of legislation, it was repealed back in 2014, and for most it was assumed it would stay that way. The fact is, it is being reconsidered, even though well known to be deeply flawed at best, and a true threat to freedom of expression at worst, and could only come under the watch of Justin Trudeau. Number 4, university student unions. 25 years ago, student unions were known as the vanguard of free speech, constantly pushing the boundaries beyond acceptable norms at the time, pushing beyond what civil society found acceptable. The university printing press wasn't just a room with rollers of ink and news, it was an atmosphere with an edgy collection of youth that wanted to see what limits they could get away with on campus. It was not uncommon for student union newspapers to pull stunts, such as plastering pictures of male and female genitalia on the front page, along with exotic language normally deemed acceptable in back alleys, but not in academia. Such was found on the cover of the University of Victoria's Martlet back in 1992. Well, such antics were seen as rude, but also just the rub of youthful testiness. Today's student unions, by contrast, are almost the polar opposite of earlier antics. Student unions of 2019 have taken on the torch of a new cause, politically correct self-censorship. Maneuvering to control the thoughts of others is never out of the question for the sectarian-dominated executive boards on many campuses today. The attempt to suppress freedom of expression is ever present. Well, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, a legal advocacy organization that grades university administrations and student unions on their policies and actions through an annual Campus Freedom Index, gave a third of student unions in 2018 a 33.9%, or a failing grade for their practices. In 2019, a dramatic improvement took place. Only 5.1% of student unions failed in how they carried out support or denial for freedom of expression. Now, did sectarian arrogance, common among youth and the politically active, suddenly give way for sober second thought? It is difficult to know the reason, but nonetheless, the change shows a positive trend upward. Quixotically, not a single student union received an A grade. To do so, it, in quote, requires having publicly and vigorously defending free speech in the face of pressure to censor speech on campus. The 2019 uptick in performance may be an outlier of mediocrity instead of the beginning of sanguine actions in the politics of student unions when it comes to defending freedom of expression. In 2020, it will be intriguing to see how student unions carry themselves and whether they fall back on repressive actions or whether they attend to the principles supporting freedom of expression without condition. While in this top 10 most dangerous for 2020, student unions are perhaps the one body that holds the most potential for celebration by the end of the year. Number 5, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has always been known as a left-of-center national public broadcaster, and in spite of this, or perhaps because of it, most Canadians, myself included, have historically looked fondly upon the broadcaster's national unifying power, especially through its unique regional programming. Canadians have taken the left leanings always with a grain of salt. For most Canadians, the CBC was like that slightly arrogant young adult that comes back home after their first semester at university, filled with spit, vinegar, passion, and more than a little left-wing naivety. They're slightly annoying at times, but you still adore and you love them. And there will be that friendly aunt that even obliges a few intelligent conversations with them. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, the CBC descended into a Toronto-centric, ultra-politically correct dystopia, a kind of Orwellian broadcaster that now follows, or perhaps leads, it's hard to say, the left-wing totalitarian voices of unreasonableness. They have now become that second-year student that goes home and gets kicked out of the house because no one can stand them any longer. The result is a drop in CBC's audience, a 14% decrease in viewership this last year, and a 50% drop in advertising revenue over the past 5 years. That would humble a private business, but CBC is not a business. It is a propaganda machine, and with its overworked staff, newly underpaid young reporters with moralistic agendas, it's a media dragon, that still holds enough weight to cajole the Canadian public into believing that suppressing freedom of speech might somehow be a good idea. Behind the scenes, with enough of its reporters firmly beholden to, or at least entranced by, the Trudeau government, we all know who that is, don't expect to see serious issues tackled in a serious way by the CBC. That includes immigration. Other mainstream media organizations that follow on the heels of CBC, like a lost child, such as CTVs and Global News, will avoid real issues as well. Because it still maintains an influential pull on the discourse of ideas in Canada, the CBC is the fifth greatest threat to freedom of speech in 2020. Some would argue it should be at the top of the list, and I admit it would be hard to ignore. They are wrong about that. Number 6, Jonathan Goldie of Canada Land Show. Mainstream media organizations such as the CBC have been trapped in the global phenomenon where online social media, Facebook and Twitter, are not only grabbing a larger audience share of news readership, but more importantly, are taking advertising income away. Lost revenue that used to maintain the foundation of the once powerful media giants has caused serious problems. Layoffs over the last few years have occurred, accelerated in 2019, and will continue in 2020. Those with the greatest experience and wisdom at the editorial level have suffered the most. What's left are underpaid, overworked reporters, many new that have little experience and very little time to fact check, properly edit, and almost no time for investigative journalism. It is not unreasonable to expect them to latch on to others that may have got a first lead, a new source, a phone interview that they were not able to get. Those frontline personalities are the ones that are now creating the news, and the rest of the media outlets simply regurgitate. Jonathan Goldie is one of Canada's reporters that has a knack for hounding sources, getting the interview, and then writing whatever twist on a story he likes. CBC, TheStraight.com, The Hive, and other organizations with limited time and resources have been known to regularly pilfer off the back of Goldie. With such indirect influence, Goldie has become a frontline source that has far more influence than he ever should. Jonathan Goldie, an almost Gollum-like creature with a sniffling, stuttering, evil-like voice, and I know because I have talked to him, would be an irrelevant character were it not for the fact he twists truth more often than he seeks it. As expected from a caricature, more real than imagined, reading his articles with an ounce of healthy skepticism, one could only conclude one thing: he is slimy. If mainstream media was depending on secondary sources that had integrity, Canada might actually be in a better position for receiving quality news. Unfortunately, with Canada's reporters relying on the likes of Gollum Goldie, quality has gone into decline. This may not be a matter of freedom of expression directly, but degradation in quality conversations across the country is still an indirect attack, and thus is indeed a concern for freedom of expression. Number 7. Khasari Govinder, BC Human Rights Commissioner. Every society functions well when it has an independent, competent judiciary. If that judiciary is undermined in any way, then the entire society faces a catharsis. Lacking trust in a higher authority is the ultimate blow to the foundations of democracy. Khasari Govinder heads one of those important higher authorities. As the head of the BC Human Rights Tribunal, she holds immense legal power. But the tribunal has become such a flawed organization, evident in some outrageous rulings, that suggest women are not women and men are not men, and so on. In other words, citizens cannot trust Govinder and certainly do not have confidence in her tribunal or the staff. Yet, Govinder's position confers the power to control voices of dissent under the weight of its judicial powers. The BC Human Rights Tribunal is scary. With caution, I use this metaphor, yet can't help it. She hearkens to 17th century witch trials and 20th century McCarthyism. Her 21st century PC totalitarianism is not much different. Govinder sits behind a bench, but don't let that fool you. She is one of Canada's most powerful opponents of free speech. She wants to make sure people are safe. Safe. She doesn't care about judicial process, nor the basic tenets of Western society's legal traditions that have been refined over centuries. Guilty until proven innocent no longer seems to apply. Are you a victim? Is the only question for Govinder and her tribunal. Even the word itself, tribunal, should send shivers down the spine. Higher education is breaking down, but so too now is the judicial system. Khasari Govinder is leading the charge into the wastebasket of a callously discarded legal tenets and traditions. Number 8, Wilfred Laurier University. I actually wrote this in my uncle. I'm just going off on a tangent here, but my uncle used to be the chair of the geography department many years ago, and I have incredibly high regard for him. I have no idea how this university has gone from such lofty heights to gutter level just trash. But anyway, number 8, Wilfred Laurier University. There are a couple good people still there. David Haskell's a good one. But anyway, number 8, Wilfred Laurier University. Some individuals and some institutions garner unusual reputations in ways that often remain unexplained, kind of mysterious. Wilfred Laurier University is one of those places. For whatever internal reasons, it seems to consistently rise to the top of attention getters over issues of freedom of expression, and not in a positive way. The Lindsay Shepherd affair in 2017 threw Shepherd, a teaching assistant at the time, into the spotlight for simply showing a Jordan Peterson video during her teaching of a class. The cult of left-wing professors at the school, including her professor Rambukkana and Pimlott, interrogated Shepherd in a way that had an eerie resemblance to something from an East German indoctrination camp for political prisoners. One just has to listen to such interrogation, widely available on the web, and compare it to the recording that Shepherd herself made of her own interrogation. It was despicable. What's worse is that Wilfred Laurier University, as an institution, not only initially defended Professor Rambukkana's behavior, but has continued to lack an understanding of why so many people find the university to be a repulsive, backward tyranny. Questioning line by line the latest response from the president, Jordan Peterson. I'm not going to go into that. Jordan Peterson has done enough on that. Let's just go to number 9. Manisha Krishnam. A senior editor and host with Vice Canada, Krishnam is a rather angry girl. Yes, girl, who also happens to be racist and blatantly loud in a not-so-endearing way. Her labeling of Canadians into color-coded groupings, white, black, brown, and so on, implicitly shows her quasi-racist tendencies, evident throughout her Twitter account. She acts as though it's perfectly fine to categorically align all people with skin color lighter than her own as oppressive, much in the same stereotyping way that Ravi Kalan uses. This could almost be labeled as colloquial, discriminatory banter in private, or on the stage of hard-hitting comedians, but it's not something that is respectable for genuine reporting in mainstream media. Vice has always had the reputation of an organization that attracts readers looking for hype instead of honesty, and Krishnam gives it to them. She has 13,000 followers on Twitter. Unequivocally, she is a danger to freedom of expression, not because she expresses herself so freely, but because she twists the discourse into a divisive and racially pitted narrative. There could be reasonable voices, but Krishnam is a master at high art yelling and screaming. It is unfortunate, since she adds nothing to a media landscape that should, if it were searching for a more serious and level-headed reporting aura, have found someone far more intelligent and nuanced than Krishnam. She actually tears down decency that Canadians have long prided themselves on. A single angry personality with a penchant for constructing artificial race divisions in Canada, where none existed before, is unfortunate, but Krishnam is a model which other reporters have been emulating. Manisha Krishnam is truly a mean girl that is eroding freedom of expression, not through direct censorship, but through an angry voice full of rhetoric that tends to drown out others who come with a more logical, rationale, and meaningful voice. She is like an insidious version of officially sanctioned trolling, and that is not what Canada needs right now. But since this is a freedom of expression list, it would also be wrong to suggest that we take up Ravi Kalan's inanity against her. If we did, we would have to ticket Manisha Krishnam for hate speech. Manisha Krishnam is less a danger as an individual and more as a symbol of the loudmouth shouting down that activists use to suppress voices they disagree with. In other words, she epitomizes a lack of civility, a none too dangerous form of crushing constructive freedom of expression. And last, number 10, Sophie Trudeau. The Prime Minister's wife could be as bad as her husband, but since she doesn't hold the more powerful title, she sits at number 10. And don't be blindsided by the ranking, though. Sophie and Justin are a tangled pair in a dangerous push for equity. Too bad it wasn't a game of equality. But they haven't quite figured out the difference between those two words, which is too bad, because nothing more really needs to be said about it and about her. So hopefully, 2020 will be a year of loud and vigorous debate in all areas. Hopefully, many will be offended. Hopefully, many will be in tears. And hopefully, many will be challenged to view the world through the eyes of another. If so, then we will know we have true freedom. The worst we could do in 2020 is find ourselves under an enforced silence.